the millennium. And most of what we know about the millennium is not from Revelation 20. Many churches sort of dismiss it because, well, it's just in that one chapter of the Bible. No, it isn't. It's a major thrust all through the Bible. And most of what we know about it comes from Isaiah 65, not Revelation chapter 20. And the more you learn about it, the more questions it raises. And now most of the denominations accruing from the Reformation unfortunately have inherited an amillennial viewpoint from Augustine and all that follows. And so there are problems with amillennialism. And as I've pointed out before, there are major problems, because you've got 1,845 references at least in the Old Testament and 318 in the New Testament. And we've touched on that, but I just want to keep that in front of us. And if you take Christ's first coming seriously, it fulfilled literally hundreds of specific specifications. And for each one of those, there's 7 or 8 for the second coming, which will be fulfilled just as literally, just as precisely as the first. And as I mentioned before, Origen was a pious, popular, and he's very persuasive. And he was one of the great figures of the 3rd century church. But you need to understand how, a couple of things, the early church became very anti-Semitic. And when you get to the Crusades later, they had contests of how many Jewish babies you could get on a sword. You and I have no grasp of the abuse of Jewishness in all its forms. Were abused by people showing the banner of Christ. Hitler was a Christian and never excommunicated from the church. You have to understand the Jewish mentality. You need to understand that before you visit Israel for a lot of reasons. But anyway, the early church became very anti-Semitic. If you tried to worship on Passover, the Jewish Passover, on the 14th of Nisan, you were called a quartodeciman. That's Latin for a 14er. You were excommunicated from the church. It's hard for us to realize how anti-Semitic the early church was. That's just a reality. It was tragic for the Jew, of course. But by the way, it was also tragic for the church because we lost our Jewish roots. And now Christians who are studying the Bible seriously are discovering the 7 feasts of Moses and the incredible richness of that heritage. And so anyway, Origen was one of those, and he wrote papers presenting Christian doctrine in Greek terms and Hellenistic terms. And tragically, he established an extreme allegorization of Scripture as his style. And that was to influence Augustine in future years. And Augustine was the Bishop of Hippo, a very, very prominent, influential leader of the early church. His famous City of God document portrayed the church as a new civic order during the ruins of the Roman Empire. And so, although his writings indeed defeated many very serious heresies of the times, unfortunately his allegorical reposturing left an amillennial eschatology in its wake. And so that's the tragedy of Augustine, from our point of view. And you can see the trail from Augustine to Auschwitz. Origen allegorized Scripture, Augustine gave us amillennialism, and that gave us the medieval eschatology, and the Reformation failed to address the eschatological problems. So most Protestant denominations are amillennial in their eschatological views, and that's tragic, of course, because the Holocaust in Germany needs to be put at the feet of the silent pulpits in Germany. But there's a lot of problems with amillennialism anyway. The messianic promises are throughout the Old Testament. All those messianic promises have their fulfillment in Jesus Christ. And that includes having his rule in the millennium. The destiny of Israel and God's covenant are questionable in the amillennial perspective. They have no grasp of the role of Israel in God's program. And the promise given to Mary by Gabriel, we've talked about that last time. And all these things are not just Old Testament ideas, they're confirmed throughout the New Testament. And we went through all of that. And I talked to you about all the divisions of theology. And if you go through a pastor's thing, you discover the one that's missing is Israelology, which involves 5/6 of the Bible. So we covered that before too. And the distinctives between Israel and the church are important. They have different origins. Israel was born in the Exodus. They went down as a family and came out as a nation. And they have slightly different missions, and they certainly have different destinies. The destiny of Israel is one thing, the destiny of the church is quite another. And so the idea that the church somehow replaces Israel is a heresy out of the pit of hell. And it denies Israel's place in God's program, which tragically, someone that holds that view doesn't realize it probably, but he's making God a liar. Because he's making a denial of all the things God promised in the New as well as the Old Testament. And so, anyway, so the 70 weeks that we've been talking about, I want to remind you, the focus of it is Israel, not the church. The church falls in that interval, but the prophecy itself is aimed at Israel, the nation and the city of Jerusalem. And of course, Paul talks about three groups, Jews, Gentiles, and the church. That trichotomy ends with the rapture, and from that point on, from Revelation 4 on, there's no church, there's Jews and Gentiles. And so the distinctives reappear after Revelation chapter 4. And we'll be focusing on chapter 2 and 3 in session 6 tomorrow.